What's going on, everybody? Gar Hoover here, and today we're going to be going through my track Groovin on the PO-33. Now, Groovin is a lo-fi house, minimal funk type of song. It's really a lot of fun. If you haven't listened to it yet, be sure to check it out up here. Also, if you haven't gotten the samples yet, be sure to check the description below, download those samples, and you can build the track kind of alongside me or use the samples however you want. And with that being said, let's take a look at this track. Alrighty, so first things first, checking out the samples. As always, we only have one melodic sample, and that's the bass today. You can hear it gets a little buzzy down low, but thankfully I don't really go that low. Next up, the guitar riff I recorded. Recorded that a few years ago, decided to chop it up and use it here. Here's the drum kit. As you can hear, some of those sounds are layered and other ones are independent. They sound pretty good. Another version of the same drum kit I copied to the bank below. Vocal sample. It's a little random and odd sample, but it really does the trick well. Shout out to Steve. Back in the day in college, we recorded that sample. Then we've got this great synth transitional sound I made in Massive, and that's going to do it for all the samples. Okay, now it's time to check out the patterns themselves. Let's take a look at the guitar first. Alright, you can see it's on the 5 and the 13, 5-13 again. Let me highlight it. There you go, you can see it better now. And it's the same guitar sample repeating on and on. It's the beginning of the sample itself, which we'll hear later on in its entirety, but right now it's jumping to the end of the sample, which is on 7 and 8. That's how it sounds. Pretty simple. And then we got that kick going on as well. And the kick is just a standard, I think it was a 909 sample, and just 4 on the floor, standard right there, going down that first vertical row. And this sounds pretty boring by itself, but you gotta remember, I was using the monotron delay at this point, and I was bringing up the cutoff with a little bit of delay on the sample as well, so that it can keep looping without it feeling mundane. So let's take a look at the next section. So you can see that this is building off of what we already established in the intro, especially with the guitars. It's the exact same pattern, 5-13, 5-13, 15. And also with the drums, similar with a 4 on the floor kick, but you can hear that there's a hi-hat that's layered on top. Here's the sample we used for the intro, and here's the sample for the verse. You can hear it's layered. I put the hi-hat sample and the kick sample together when I imported them so that I don't have to have a separate track. And now we see we've got the hi-hat, the open hi-hat grooving on that third vertical row, doing that offbeat groove. So now let's actually try and take a look at the bass for this section, because it has an interesting feel to it that's more offbeat. Let me just point at the groove instead of trying to call out the numbers. So I'm sure no one could see that. It's some type of groove like that. It has that rhythm. Let me just punch out the rhythm. And so that layered on top of a standard 4 on the floor has this bounciness to it. That works well with lo-fi house or any type of house for that matter, honestly. And that's going to do it for the verse, and now we're going to take a look at the build next. Alright, so I actually just punched that in wrong for that last section. Let me show you how it's done here. It's a pretty weird order. That's for all 8 patterns to play out. Alright, so you know what? You can already hear it's kind of dragging on without the monotron. And those last 2 patterns really bring us into that chorus. So let's take a look at the beginning part of this section. We've got that transitional sound I was talking about at the beginning. It actually tails off into the other patterns, and you can hear it. The reverb of it is still going on and on and on. It's pretty cool how that works because I have enough tracks to let that happen. And now let's take a look at the drums. Drums are pretty simple. And it's that 4 on the floor kick again, just keeping steady with that. And You can hear the difference between the two kicks. That one with the hi-hat on adds a lot of energy and keeps the drive kind of going in this quieter section. And now let's take a look at the guitar, because that really changes up for this section. So you can see there's a lot of stuff getting punched in, but oh, there it is. So that's all I punched in. I held down right and just kind of punched it in straight up instead of trying to figure out a groove, because I knew that was what I wanted to use at some point, was kind of the clean, pure sample. But having it chopped up, I keep it a lot more synchronized with the tempo. So if I was just to focus on those two patterns, 5 and 6, we would hear that synth sound transition again. So I had to make another copy of that first pattern without the synth sound so that it continues transition well. And this is where I used the monotron a lot, was I brought down the cutoff, as you can remember from the video, and it started to increase the delay to kind of add additional dynamics as I repeated that section through 2 times. Let's see what I'm talking about here. So now we're doing that clean first one. This is where I'm bringing up the cutoff and adding in the delay as well. And that's really where the dynamics increase until we get to this part where it's that second half of the build. And so now let's just take a look at those final 2 patterns, 7 and 8, leading up to the drop that we're going to hear later on. You can hear a lot of energy going on, and a lot of that is coming from the drums. So standard 4 on the floor kick, I took out the hi-hat, so now it's just the pure kick. And I decided to use just the pure kick because then I wanted the rest of the sounds in this section to shine. But you can hear the tonality in it is changing. And that's because I'm actually starting to adjust the pitch. So you can hear a subtle change there. And what I'm doing is I'm adjusting the pitch step by step as I punch it in. So I adjust the pitch and then I punch it in. And then I do the same thing again, and now let's hear it. So there you could hear, obviously it's a little more energetic there, but you could hear that the pitch was changing as the pattern went through. And it keeps going up and up. And you can hear there's an additional sound in there as well, and that happens to be a high pass filter. So let me show you how I do that. There we go. Got the high pass going. I hold down right and I twist the knob to adjust it. So you'll hear it on the kick here. Oh, I twisted it too far that time. The kick just completely disappeared with the high pass. That one's pretty good. Sorry that took so long for me to get. And if I adjust the peak of the resonance, you can hear it a little more dramatically on the kick, but I don't like it that intense for this section because there's a lot going on already. And now I think it's time to check out drum section part 2, I guess you could call it. It's the same drum bank, I just copied it. It's got a lot going on here. You can see every single step is filled up. You can hear that snare is getting higher and higher in pitch, and that just kind of adds that energy. You can also hear it kind of alternates there a little bit as well, and that has to do with an adjustment in volume. Let me just deconstruct this whole thing for you so you can see what I mean. Let me start first by adjusting the pitch back to the original pitch of the drum kit. Hold down right and adjust the pitch. There we go. Rewrote it. Now it's all the same pitch, nice and clean. And now let's look at this first section. I'm going to remove second vertical row and the fourth vertical row. So you can kind of hear that it sounds a little weird right now, but check this out. I'm going to bring the volume down, and then I'm going to press right and go into edit mode and just fill in those 2 rows. And you can hear now there's like an alternating feel to it. It feels more natural. And so now what we need to do is write in the pitch. So let's change it to the tone knob, and now let's adjust the pitch. So now it's hold down right and twist the pitch knob. So now that's got that good build sound to it, and it actually worked out pretty well. You usually don't do that in one take. And the guitar riff is the same thing, but you can hear that it's kind of thinning out a little bit, I guess you could say, and that's because there's a high pass filter that I've written into it in the same way I did with the kick drum. You can hear it on the end notes right there. That's very thin in comparison, and that kind of just ends. You can see, yep, all the way that high up on the high pass filter. So it gets turned up all the way as I did with the kick drum, and that just helps add additional tension. And that's going to do it for the build. So now let's take a look at the drop. Alright, so now it's time to go into the drop. Let me just play the first part. Man, that is such a good groove. I don't care who you are, that's really nice. Let's first take a look at the guitars. It's the same exact groove as the bridge, it just doesn't have the high pass on it. Alright, so now let's take a look at the drums. Drums on this are pretty basic, but I think it's important to take a look at them. We got a standard layered hi-hat kick for the 1 and the 9, and in between that is where we have the layered hi-hat kick and the clap all together. So that perfect triple layer so that we only have to use one track for our drums. And also, as always, we got the offbeat hi-hats on that third vertical row, just helping with that tight groove. But here, check this out. Oh, you heard that double snare hit on that final pattern, and that is the same kick, but you can see here the hi-hats, the 15 is missing, and the claps are the same, so that's great. But we have this snare hit that's happening that kind of helps add this transition effect. So the important part here is that we've got 10, 11, 10, 12. It's the same groove, but I have two ending patterns, one with the snare and one without the snare. And the one with the snare is obviously going to be at the end, and it helps add that transition either back around to the beginning or to a new section. And there's the snares. There you go. It behaves as a transitional. Here, let me show you actually. Let me see, go from 12 to 13. So then we transition into that new section a lot cleaner. But before we jump into that, let me show you the bass. I haven't shown you the bass for this section yet, because it is a different groove. And obviously that's really hard to point out, so let me just play it real fast. Oh, there it is. So you kind of get the point. That's the groove that's going on. It's kind of bouncing around once again. It's got a little bit more busyness to it than the others, and it's that same pattern that goes for each of the patterns that we're using. That's terrible description. It's the same rhythm, but it's just different notes for the patterns. Hopefully that helps a little bit more when I tried to explain it that time. Sorry about that. But the same bass line is actually used in this next section. So it's the same bass line, and it just helps everything stay glued together. Same thing with the drums. Same kick, same clap, same hi-hat. Nothing else has changed. It keeps everything feeling tight. No more guitar for this section, and now we're actually going to look at that weird vocal chop I was talking about earlier. Oh, actually I accidentally deleted the first step on that first pattern. Let me go to the second pattern. Holding down the first step, it's now copied, as you can see, and now I can jump over to the next pattern and paste it. So that's a great little tip. So you can hear that that's like a weird, it almost sounds like tonal chops that are like pitched up and down, but it's just the same vocal sound that's just chopped up all funny. So it's that, let me try and find that. Oh, that's the first one. Alright. clearly struggling at trying to find the right rhythm for this section. You know what? Oh, there's the ending. Let's just play it. So you get the point of that. It has a really fun feel to it. It's a little bit different. Let me actually just show you what the full sample sounds like, because it's just been those chaps the whole time, even in this, when I showed you off the sample in the first place. Let me find one I'm not using. I don't think I'm using that one in any of my patterns. Let's trim it open. Alright, kind of sounds a little weird, but when you chop it up, it sounds pretty fun. It works out well. So you never know. Chop up some random vocal and it could sound really fun, especially on the PO-33. Oh, I actually did it decently that time. That's pretty fun. Also, I kind of want to make a point here that you can make great songs with only 3 active tracks going. Let me show you. We got the bass going on 1, and then we've got the drums and that other vocal sample on 10 and 11. And we have an open slot to use anything that we would ever want to add an additional sound to it. I don't really think it necessarily needs that. So now let's take a look at the final patterns. Now, as you can obviously tell, this section has a lot more energy than the previous one. So if we check out the drums for, oh, you know what, the bass line is the exact same. Let's just get that out of the way now. Now let's take a look at the drums, because the drums are where it changes a little bit. Same kick, same clap, same hi-hat, but now we've added on the 4th vertical row just a closed hi-hat. And it adds that kind of like galloping groove to it that adds a lot of, just adds bounce to it, as we were talking about earlier. You want a lot of bounce in a house track, especially if it's going to be minimal. Now let's take a look at those vocal chops. Same thing kind of. Oh, yep, there we go. So it's a pretty simple riff. It's got that one vocal that slides in and it goes. Let me see if I can just. Oh, there we go. So it's something like that, essentially, is what it is for the groove. But also, we got to talk about how we use the monotron in this section, because it transitioned back to that front section. What I did was I brought down the cutoff, and like this, I was like, at this section, started to bring down the cutoff. And then once we got to that next section is where that cutoff is already at a perfect point to bring it back up for that transition. So that's kind of how that section went down. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and were able to learn some stuff from it. Here are some other tutorials I've done, and also be sure to subscribe if you like pocket operator tutorials or anything having to do with pocket operators. I love making videos with them, so there'll be plenty more in the future, and I'll see you guys in the next video.